Disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
How long was a Chancellor's term in the Galactic Senate? Obi-Wan claims Palpatine has stayed in office long after his term has expired, so how long has it been? Palpatine has held the position of Chancellor for 13 years at this point, but a term length was only meant to be 4 years. The Senate's leader could be elected for a second term, so the maximum length should be 8 years. In Attack of the Clones, Palpatine is granted emergency powers to stay in office, but that means he had already exceeded his term limit. So how did he do that? The in-universe reference book Star Wars Propaganda states that Palpatine was able to extend his term thanks to the growing separatist movement. He convinced senators that it would be unwise to change leadership in the midst of such a crisis, and so he was allowed to remain in office for an additional 2 years. When the Clone Wars began in earnest, the same argument was made by Jar Jar Binks, granting him full emergency powers. Everything Palpatine did was meant to be the act of a leader reluctantly accepting more and more power slowly over time.
How was Supreme Chancellor Palpatine able to remain in office so long after his term ended? How long do Supreme Chancellors serve normally anyway? The administrative makeup of the Galactic Republic, particularly the Supreme Chancellor, share a lot of similarities with the President of the United States. George Lucas did use Nixon as a major inspiration for Palpatine after all. Normally, a Supreme Chancellor of the Republic could serve up to 2 4-year terms, or 8 years total, assuming they are re-elected at the end of their first 4-year term. Palpatine was elected Chancellor 32 years before the Battle of Yavin, and so normally would have had to step down 8 years later in 24 BBY. However, the Separatist crisis, which began to take shape the same year that Palpatine would have normally approached the end of his service, prompted the Galactic Senate to extend his term in an attempt to prevent all-out war. Of course, he manipulated Jar Jar Binks to motion for Palpatine to receive emergency powers 2 years after that, which allowed him to remain in power until the war was over. By 19 BBY, Palpatine had been Chancellor 5 years longer than his term normally would have allowed.